100 sleepy facts about the Industrial Revolution. Hello there, and welcome to History to Fall Asleep. Tonight, we are stepping into a world of slow-turning wheels, distant engines, whistles, canal water moving beneath moonlight, and long brick mills standing quietly against the night sky. Our subject is the Industrial Revolution. It was one of the great changes in human history, but it did not arrive all at once. It came gradually. It appeared in workshops, fields, mines, docks, riverside warehouses, crowded streets, and in the patient hands of people who learned to work alongside machines that were still new and strange. For many generations, most objects had been made slowly in homes or small workshops. Cloth was spun by hand, and iron was shaped close to the fire. Goods moved at the pace of a horse, a sailing ship, or a walking person. Then, across the late 18th and 19th centuries, new ways of using energy, organizing labor, moving materials, and sharing knowledge began to alter the rhythm of everyday life. This was not simply a story about famous inventors. It was also a story about spinners and weavers, miners and mechanics, children and parents, canal builders, railway, surveyors, dock workers, clerks, shopkeepers, writers, nurses, reformers, and families who watched their towns grow beyond recognition. Some parts of this history are filled with invention and confidence. Other parts are difficult. Factories could create work, but they could also demand exhausting hours. Cities could offer opportunity, but they could also bring crowding, smoke, illness, and uncertainty. The Industrial Revolution changed lives unevenly. It opened doors for some and placed heavy burdens on others. Tonight, we will move through 100 gentle facts about that changing world. We will visit spinning rooms and coal seams, ironworks and rail stations, workers' streets, and illuminated shop windows. We will follow the quiet connections between cotton, steam, clocks, money, law, science, and the modern routines that still shape the way many of us live. There is nothing you need to memorize. There will be no rush, no test at the end, and no need to keep every detail. Let the facts come and go as they wish. You can simply rest beside them for a while, like watching warm light pass behind the windows of a late train. If you enjoy calm history for sleep, you are welcome to subscribe to History to Fall Asleep. But for now, let your shoulders loosen, let your breathing slow. Let the day become a little more distant, and let us begin. Imagine standing at the edge of a 19th century town just before dawn. The roofs are dark. A river moves quietly beneath a bridge. Somewhere in the distance, a coal fire is being prepared. Soon a bell will ring. Doors will open. Workers will make their way through narrow streets, past warehouses and canals, toward buildings whose windows will brighten as the day begins. No one standing there could see the whole system at once. They could not see the cotton fields across the ocean, the coal seams beneath distant hills, the accounts in merchant offices, or the rails being surveyed toward the next city. They could only see their own part of the day. That is how we will approach this history. not as a parade of machines, but as a world made from many connected lives. We will keep the pace gentle and follow the pathways that linked homes to mills, villages to cities, mines to engines, and local work to a changing globe. Fact 1. The Industrial Revolution was a long transformation, not a single moment. It can be tempting to imagine one dramatic morning when a factory chimney first released smoke and the modern world suddenly began. In reality, industrialization unfolded over many decades. Different places changed at different speeds, and older ways of working continued beside newer ones for a very long time. A hand loom could still be heard in a cottage while a powered loom was being installed in a large mill only a few miles away. A farmer might travel to market on an old road while railway tracks were being laid beyond the next hill. The Industrial Revolution was less like a switch being flipped and more like a slow tide rising through ordinary life. In that gradual quality matters. It reminds us that people living through the change did not know where it would lead. Simply noticed that work, travel, prices, towns, and expectations were beginning to move differently. Fact 2. Britain became an early centre of industrial change for many reasons. The early Industrial Revolution is closely associated with Britain, though its effects and influences became global. Britain had coalfields, rivers, ports, markets, investors, skilled craftspeople, and connections to trade networks that reached far beyond its shores. None of these conditions worked alone. Coal was useful because people learned better ways to use it. Rivers mattered because mills could be built beside them. Ports mattered because ships carried raw materials and finished goods. Laws, banks, workshops, and commercial habits all helped create an environment where new machines could be tried, improved, copied, and financed. Though it was not inevitable. History rarely is. But in Britain, several conditions met at a useful moment. Small experiments accumulated. An improved machine made another improvement worthwhile. A new road encouraged a new market. Over time, this web of changes began to reshape the wider world. Fact 3. Before factories, much production happened in homes and small workshops. Before large mills became familiar, many goods were made through systems that brought raw materials into rural homes. A merchant might provide wool or cotton. One family spun thread, another wove cloth. A third dyed or finished the fabric. Work was spread across many doors and many hearths. This arrangement is often called domestic or cottage industry. It gave people a degree of flexibility, but it also depended on merchants, weather, family labor, and irregular supplies. A worker could be skilled and hard-working, yet still wait for materials or payment. Factories did not erase this world overnight. For years, household production and mechanized production existed together. Yet the factory introduced a powerful new idea: bring workers, machines, power, and raw materials into one place. Once that idea took hold, it changed not only what people made, but also when, where, and how they worked. Fact 4. Textiles were at the heart of the early Industrial Revolution. Cloth may seem quiet compared with a locomotive or a blast furnace, but textiles were central to early industrial growth. People everywhere needed clothing, sheets, sacks, sails, and household fabrics. Demand was steady, and the work of turning fiber into cloth involved many separate steps. There was cleaning, carding, spinning, weaving, dyeing, printing, and finishing. A change in one stage could create pressure on the next. Faster weaving created a need for more thread. Faster spinning created a need for more weaving. This chain of needs encouraged invention. Cotton became especially important because it could be made into many kinds of fabric. It could be light or strong, plain or patterned. As machines made spinning and weaving faster, textile towns grew rapidly. The soft movement of thread through a machine became one of the sounds that announced a new industrial age. Fact 5. The flying shuttle made weaving faster before power took over. One early improvement in textile work was the flying shuttle. It made it easier for a weaver to send the shuttle carrying thread across a wider loom. A task that could require 2 people could, in some cases, be handled more quickly by one. The machine did not look as dramatic as a steam engine. It was a modest wooden device. But modest changes can alter an entire system. When weaving became faster, spinners struggled to provide enough yarn. That shortage became an invitation for further invention. This is one of the peaceful patterns of industrial history. One improvement does not stand alone. It changes the balance of work around it. People notice the new difficulty, then try to solve it. The Industrial Revolution often advanced through this quiet conversation between one machine and another. Fact 6. The spinning jenny allowed one worker to spin several threads at once. The spinning jenny, associated with James Hargreaves, allowed a spinner to work multiple spindles rather than only one. It did not make spinning effortless, but it increased the amount of yarn a worker could produce. For textile merchants, that promise was enormous. More thread meant more cloth could be woven. For workers, the change could feel uncertain. A machine that increased output might also change who was needed, what skill was valued, and how much a household could earn. The spinning jenny reminds us that machines are never only machines. They are also changes in relationships. They affect the person using them, the family depending on merchant's wage, the merchant ordering supplies, and the customer buying cloth. A row of turning spindles could ripple outward into an entire community. Fact 7. Water power helped create the first large spinning mills. At Richard Arkwright's water frame used the steady force of moving water to drive spinning machinery. Water wheels had powered mills for centuries, but the new textile machinery needed reliable power and room to operate. This encouraged the construction of larger mill buildings beside rivers and streams. Cromford Mill in Derbyshire became an important example of this new arrangement. Machines, workers, supervision, and power were gathered together under one roof. Lake itself began to matter differently. A stream was no longer only a pleasant feature of the countryside. It was a source of motion that could be turned into thread, from free to water power had limits. It depended on location and season. Still, it showed what could happen when a machine-acted white connect wand to a steady source of energy. The factory system began to take shape beside running water. Fact 8. The spinning mule combined earlier ideas and produced fine thread. Samuel Crompton's spinning mule combined features of the spinning, jenny, and the water frame. It could produce strong, fine yarn suitable for delicate cotton cloth. The name mule suggested a hybrid, and that is exactly what it was. A machine born from joining two earlier approaches. Industrial change often worked this way. Inventors did not always create something from nothing. They studied what already existed, noticed its limits, and found a new arrangement. The mule helped textile producers make finer fabrics in larger quantities, and it became an important part of the cotton industry. Behind the elegant name was a demanding working world. Machines had to be adjusted, cleaned, repaired, and watched. Fine thread could snap. A small mistake could slow a room full of workers. Even in an age of machinery, patience and attention remained essential. Fact 9. The power loom brought weaving into the factory on a larger scale. Power looms used mechanical power to weave cloth. Their spread was gradual, uneven, and deeply disruptive. Handloom weavers had long relied on skill developed over years. When powered weaving expanded, many faced falling wages and uncertainty. The loom itself turned a familiar act into a rhythmic industrial process. Threads moved in repeated patterns. Wooden frames clicked. Belts and shafts carried motion from a water wheel or steam engine. A room filled with looms could produce cloth at a scale that earlier generations would have found astonishing. Yet, a power loom was not a magical object. It depended on workers who prepared yarn, corrected problems, changed bobbins, and kept the machinery moving. The factory was a partnership of power, design, maintenance, and human attention. Its sound was mechanical, but its life was still human. Fact 10. A factory was a new way of organizing time as much as work. A factory brought machines and workers together, but it also brought time under tighter control. In a household workshop, work could often bend around meals, weather, family needs, and daylight. In a factory, bells, clocks, and supervisors shaped the day more firmly. The pace of work became linked to the pace of the machine. A person could not easily pause when a line of spindles or looms was in motion. Shifts began at set hours. Breaks were counted. Late arrival could mean lost wages. This new discipline was one of the quiet revolutions inside the larger industrial revolution. The changing relationship with time reached beyond factories. Railway timetables, office hours, school bells, and shop schedules all became more important. The clock was not new, but it began to speak with a louder voice. Fact 11. Steam power allowed industry to move beyond rivers. Water power tied early mills to rivers and streams. Steam power gradually changed that. A steam engine could be placed near coal, ports, cities, or transport routes. It did not need a fast-flowing river outside the door. This freedom of location helped factories grow in places where labor, markets, and supplies could be gathered. Towns could expand around engines. Workshops could operate more consistently than those depending on seasonal water flow. Steam was not instantly cheap or simple, but it became a flexible source of power. The sight of a chimney became a symbol of this change. A chimney suggested heat, fuel, motion, labor, and production taking place inside. It also suggested smoke, noise, and new forms of pollution. Steam gave industry a powerful new independence, but it also tied industrial life more deeply to coal. Fact 12. Coal became the fuel beneath the industrial landscape. Coal had been used for a long time, but industrialization increased its importance enormously. It heated furnaces, powered steam engines, helped produce iron, and warmed growing towns. Coal was ancient sunlight stored in the earth, and people learned to lose energy to then release its energy on an unprecedented scale. Coal fields influenced the map of industry. Mines, railways, canals, and factories often developed near one another because moving heavy fuel was expensive. A region with accessible coal could become a center of work and investment. But coal also demanded difficult labor. It had to be dug from narrow seams, brought to the surface, sorted, transported, and burned. The warm glow of a factory window often began far underground, where miners worked in darkness. Industrial prosperity was built not only above ground in mills, but also deep beneath it. Fact 13. Mining was one of the most dangerous kinds of industrial work. Coal mining could be exhausting and dangerous. Workers faced darkness, dust, flooding, falling rock, and the risk of explosions caused by gases underground. Mines employed men, women, and children in different periods and regions, each performing difficult tasks. A mine was its own hidden world. Lamps flickered on wet stone. Carts moved through low passages. The air could feel close and heavy. The work required knowledge, strength, courage, and an awareness of danger that never fully disappeared. The Industrial Revolution is sometimes told through grand machines standing in daylight, Stormabad. Mining reminds us that much of its energy came from places few customers ever saw. Every engine, furnace, and railway depended on people who extracted fuel from the earth, often under conditions that later generations worked hard to reform. Fact 14. The first important steam engines were designed to pump water from mines. Before steam engines powered factories and trains, they were used to solve a very practical problem: water in mines. Deep mines often flooded. Pumping water out by hand, animal power, or simple machinery could be slow and costly. Thomas Newcomen's early 18th century engine used steam and atmospheric pressure to drive a pump. It was large, hungry for fuel, and not efficient by later standards. Still, it did useful work. It allowed some mines to be worked more deeply, which meant more coal could be reached. There is something calm about this beginning. The steam engine did not first arrive with speed. It arrived with pumping. It rose and fell patiently beside a mine, lifting water a little at a time. From that steady motion grew a technology that would later reshape travel, manufacturing, and the imagination of distance. Fact 15. James Watt improved steam engines by reducing wasted heat. James Watt's improvements to the steam engine made steam power more efficient. A key innovation was the separate condenser, which allowed the main cylinder to stay hotter while steam was condensed elsewhere. This reduced the waste of energy that had limited earlier engines. Watt did not work in isolation. His ideas developed through collaboration, experimentation, financing, skilled manufacturing, and the wider culture of practical science. His partnership with Matthew Boulton helped bring improved engines into broader use. The important point is not that one person single-handedly created the Industrial Revolution. It is that a useful improvement found a world ready to use it. Mines, mills, and workshops all had reasons to seek reliable power. When better engines became available, they became part of a much larger transformation. Fact 16. Rotary steam engines could turn wheels, not just pumps. Early steam engines often moved a beam up and down, which was ideal for pumping. Later developments allowed steam power to create rotary motion. This meant an engine could turn wheels, shafts, and machinery inside a factory. That change widened the uses of steam. It could drive textile equipment, flour mills, printing presses, and many other machines. Motion could be carried from a central engine through belts and gears to different rooms of a building. For workers, this could create a new environment of constant movement. The engine might be in a basement or separate engine house, but its power traveled everywhere. A belt overhead, a turning wheel, or a vibrating frame showed that the engine was awake. The factory became a building with a mechanical heartbeat. Fact 17. Iron was essential to the machinery of industrialization. Wood had been central to earlier tools, carts, ships, and buildings. Industrialization increased the demand for iron. Machines needed strong frames. Mines needed rails and tools. Bridges, engines, boilers, and railways all depended on metal. Iron-making required heat, skill, raw materials, and investment. It also required workers who understood furnaces and could judge the behavior of molten metal. The glowing world of an ironworks was very different from a quiet spinning room, but the two were connected. Textile machines needed iron parts. Steam engines needed iron cylinders. Transport networks needed iron rails. As iron became more available and more useful, it changed what engineers could imagine. Structures could become larger. Machines could become stronger. The industrial landscape began to take on the hard, durable shapes of metal. Fact 18. Coke helped transform iron production. In the early 18th century, Abraham Darby used coke, a fuel made from coal, in iron smelting. This mattered because traditional charcoal supplies could be limited, while coal was abundant in some regions. The change was not simple or immediate. Iron making involved many experiments and local conditions. But coke made it possible to produce iron in new ways and at larger scales. Over time, this helped support the growth of machinery, railways, and construction. The story also shows how industrialization linked materials together. Coal did not only power engines, it helped make iron. Iron helped build engines and rails. Rails helped coal and iron more efficiently. Each material strengthened the use of the others. The Industrial Revolution was a network, not a row of separate inventions. Fact 19. Puddling and rolling made iron more reliable for new uses. Later, 18th century techniques known as puddling and rolling improved the production of workable iron. Puddling helped remove impurities from molten iron, while rolling shaped heated metal into bars and sheets. These processes may sound technical, but they had a simple effect. They made metal more useful and more consistent. When builders and engineers could expect iron of a certain quality, they could plan with greater confidence. Rails, bridges, machines, and tools became easier to standardize. Industrial progress often depended on this kind of quiet reliability. A famous invention attracts attention, but a dependable material can matter just as much. The ability to make similar pieces again and again was one of the foundations of mass production. It made the future feel more repeatable. Fact 20. Machine tools made other machines more accurate. As industry expanded, engineers needed parts that fit together with greater precision. This encouraged the development of machine tools, such as lathes, boring machines, and planing machines. These devices did not always make finished goods for customers. Instead, they made the parts that allowed other machines to work. A precise cylinder could make a steam engine more efficient. A carefully cut gear could reduce wasted motion. A standard screw thread could make repairs easier. These details were small, but they mattered enormously. There is a gentle lesson here. Industrial change was not only about speed. It was also about accuracy. A world of large machines depended on people who cared about fractions, measurements, surfaces, and fit. The modern machine age was built not only by dramatic power, but also by careful hands working close to metal. Fact 21. Canals were early industrial highways for heavy goods. Before railways spread, canals offered a practical way to move bulky materials. Coal, stone, iron, timber, grain, and manufactured goods could be carried by boat more cheaply than by road in many situations. Canal building transformed parts of Britain. Waterways linked mines, factories, towns, rivers, and ports. Locks lifted boats through changes in height. Aqueducts carried water over valleys. Warehouses and wharves appeared beside new routes. A canal moved slowly, and that slowness was part of its advantage. Heavy loads did not need to hurry if they could travel steadily. Along the towpath, horses walked at a measured pace. At night, water reflected lamps from bridges and warehouses. The canal age showed that industrialization was not always loud. Sometimes it arrived as a long, quiet line of water connecting one place to another. Fact 22. The Bridgewater Canal helped bring coal toward Manchester. The Bridgewater Canal, opened in the 18th century, is often remembered as an important early canal project. It carried coal from the Duke of Bridgewater's mines at Worsley, helping lower transport costs and making fuel making fuel available. Its significance was larger than one route. It demonstrated that carefully planned waterways could change the economics of a region. If coal could travel more easily, factories and homes could use it more readily. If goods could move in bulk, merchants could reach wider markets. The canal became part of a growing landscape of industrial connections. A mine was no longer only a mine. It became the beginning of a route. A city was no longer only a market. It became a destination linked by water, labor, capital, and engineering. Fact 23. Turnpike roads improved overland travel before railways. Road travel in the 18th century could be difficult. Mud, ruts, steep hills, and poor drainage slowed wagons and coaches. Turnpike trusts raised money through tolls to improve many roads, building a more reliable network for passengers and goods. Better roads did not make travel effortless, but they helped. Coaches could run on more regular schedules. Merchants could move smaller loads more predictably. News, letters, and people began to travel with a little more confidence. This was another reminder that the Industrial Revolution was not confined to factories. It depended on connections. A machine was useful only if raw materials could reach it, and finished goods could leave. Roads, bridges, inns, and toll gates were all part of the wider system that allowed industrial life to expand. Fact 24. New road surfaces made movement steadier and more predictable. Road engineers experimented with better ways to build surfaces. John Macadam became known for promoting layers of carefully sized stone that could drain water and create a firmer road. Such improvements seem ordinary, but they changed the rhythm of movement. A wagon with fewer delays could carry goods farther. A coach could keep a timetable more reliably. Travelers could expect the journey to be difficult, but not entirely uncertain. For merchants, predictability was valuable. It allowed planning. The road beneath a wheel can be easy to overlook. Yet industrialization depended on such hidden foundations. Before a factory's products reached a shop, they had to cross roads, canals, docks, and later railways. The smoothness of a surface could shape the smoothness of an entire trade network. Fact 25. Early railways first served mines and heavy industry. Rails existed before passenger railways. Wooden and then iron tracks were used to help move heavy wagons, especially in mining districts. A wagon rolling on rails faced less resistance than one moving over rough ground. At first, horses often pulled these wagons. The idea was practical rather than glamorous. It was about moving coal and materials more efficiently. But once rails proved useful, people began to imagine other forms of power and wider routes. This is a familiar pattern in history. A simple solution to a local problem becomes the seed of a larger system. The early railway was not born as a grand symbol of modernity. It began as a way to reduce friction. Yet that quiet purpose would eventually help redraw maps, schedules, businesses, and daily expectations. Fact 26. The Stockton and Darlington Railway showed what a public railway could become. The Stockton and Darlington Railway opened in 1825 and became an important milestone in railway history. It carried coal and goods, and it also demonstrated the possibility of using steam locomotives on a public line. The railway did not instantly create the modern travel system. Early lines had mixed forms of traction and mixed purposes, but the idea was gaining strength. A route of iron rails could connect mines, towns, ports, markets, and passengers in a new way. For people who watched the early trains, the sight could be startling. A machine moved under its own power, pulling loads, once thought suitable only for horses. Smoke drifted above the line. Wheels clattered over joints in the rails. The landscape itself seemed to be learning a new speed. Fact 27. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway made passenger rail travel more visible. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway, opened in 1830, helped make railway travel a major public phenomenon. It linked two important industrial cities and showed that railways could carry both goods and passengers on a regular basis. For merchants, the railway offered faster movement between a port and a manufacturing centre. For travellers, it introduced a new feeling of speed and schedule. The journey that once depended on road conditions, horses, and weather could be made in a more organised way. Railways did more than reduce travel times. They changed how people imagined space. A town that had felt distant could become reachable in a day. Families, workers, newspapers, packages, and ideas moved more quickly. The horizon did not disappear, but it moved closer. Fact 28. Railway timetables helped standardize the meaning of time. Before railways, local time could vary from town to town. Noon was related to the position of the sun. This worked well enough when travel was slow. But railways needed coordinated timetables. A train could not easily run if every station followed a slightly different clock. Over time, railway time encouraged the use of more standardized timekeeping. Clocks at stations became symbols of this new order. People began to organize journeys, appointments, and work around printed schedules. This was a quiet cultural shift. Time had always passed, of course, but industrial life encouraged people to measure it more precisely and share that measurement across distance. The ticking clock became part of the machinery of modern life, even in places far from a factory floor. Fact 29. Ports and docks connected industrial towns to the wider world. Industrial growth depended on ports. Raw cotton, timber, dyes, metals, food, and other materials arrived from many regions. Finished goods left for markets abroad. Docks became busy places of warehouses, cranes, ships, clerks, sailors, and labourers. A port was a meeting place between local industry and global trade. A bale of cotton might arrive after a long ocean crossing, then travel by canal or railway to a spinning mill. Cloth made in that mill could return to the docks and leave again as a finished product. The Industrial Revolution, therefore, cannot be understood as only a national story. It was connected to oceans, colonies, commercial networks, and people across the world. A quiet object in a shop window could carry within it the history of many journeys. Fact 30. Manchester became a famous symbol of industrial textile production. Manchester grew into one of the most recognizable industrial cities of the 19th century. Its mills, warehouses, canals, rail connections, and markets made it a major center for cotton manufacturing and trade. The city came to represent both the promise and the cost of industrialization. It offered work, innovation, and commerce. It also experienced crowding, smoke, poor housing, and harsh working conditions. Visitors could be impressed by the scale of its production and troubled by the conditions of many who lived there. Manchester's importance was not only in its buildings, it was also in the network around them. Cotton, coal, machinery, labor, finance, and transport met there. The city became a kind of living diagram of industrial society, with all its energy, inequality, possibility, and strain. Fact 31. The cotton industry was deeply connected to slavery and empire. The growth of cotton manufacturing in Britain was linked to a global system that included plantation slavery, colonial power, and unequal trade. Much raw cotton came from places where enslaved people, especially in the American South, were forced to labor under brutal conditions. This connection is essential to remember. A textile mill in Britain did not stand apart from the world. Its machines depended on materials grown through systems of coercion and violence. Wealth created by cotton moved through merchants, ports, banks, mills, and markets. Industrial history is not only a story of mechanical ingenuity, it is also a story of power. The comfort of a cotton garment could hide a long chain of labor and suffering. Looking at that chain, honestly, makes the history more complete, and it honors the people whose lives were bound into it. Fact 32. Industrial goods traveled through global markets. As factories increased production, manufacturers looked for customers far beyond their local towns. Cloth, tools, pottery, machinery, and other goods moved through trade networks that stretched across continents. This expansion brought profits for some merchants and investors, but it could also disrupt local producers elsewhere. Then, a region that had long made its own textiles might suddenly face competition from imported machine-made cloth. Trade was not a simple exchange between equals. It was shaped by military power, colonial rule, tariffs, and access to shipping. The Industrial Revolution created a world in which distant places could affect one another more directly. A harvest, war, strike, or shipping delay on one side of the world could influence prices in a city far away. The web of industry became global, and its threads were not always gentle. Fact 33. Industrializations spread beyond Britain in different forms. Britain industrialized early, but other regions developed their own industrial paths. Belgium became an important center of coal, iron, textiles, and engineering. France, the German states, the United States, Japan, and many other places industrialized in their own ways and on their own schedules, the Binimod. No country simply repeated the British experience. Local resources, governments, labor systems, education, transport, and trade relationships all shaped what happened. Some places emphasized textiles. Others focused on mining, railways, steel, chemicals, or machinery. The Industrial Revolution was therefore not one identical process moving across a map. It was a series of connected transformations. The same steam engine could mean different things in different places. It might represent opportunity, national power, dangerous work, urban growth, or all of these at once. Fact 34. Belgium was among the earliest industrial regions on the European continent. Belgium had coalfields, skilled workers, and useful transport links. In the 19th century, it became one of the early industrial centers of continental Europe. Coal mining, iron production, textiles, and railways all played important roles. Its experience shows how geography could help shape industrial growth. Coal and iron near one another made certain kinds of production easier. Rivers and railways connected industrial districts to markets. Towns grew around mines and factories. Yet Belgium also shows that industrialization was not a copy and paste process. It involved local entrepreneurs, workers, laws, and social conditions. Each industrial region developed its own character. The same broad forces could create very different streets, buildings, and working lives. Fact 35. The United States developed industry on a vast and changing scale. In the United States, industrial growth drew on water power, cotton, textiles, railroads, coal, iron, immigration, finance, and a large internal market. The process unfolded across a vast territory and was deeply shaped by slavery, civil war, westward expansion, and the displacement of indigenous peoples. Early textile towns in New England used rivers to power mills. Later, coal, steel, railways, oil, and electricity supported large-scale industrial growth. Cities such as Pittsburgh, Chicago, and others became associated with different kinds of production.
American industrialization
Had its own rhythm. It involved extraordinary expansion, but also conflict over labor, race, land, wealth, and political power. The factory and railway did not simply arrive in an empty landscape. They became part of an already complicated history. Fact 36. Industrialization also changed regions under colonial rule. Industrial growth in Europe and North America had consequences for places under colonial rule. Colonies could be used as sources of raw materials, markets for manufactured goods, or strategic locations within global trade. In South Asia, for example, long-established textile traditions faced pressure from imported, machine-made cloth and colonial economic policies. In many parts of the world, industrialization was experienced not as a freely chosen local development, but as a force connected to empire and unequal power. This broader view helps us see that the Industrial Revolution had many centers and many edges. Its benefits and burdens were not distributed fairly. The same trade route that carried wealth to one port could weaken livelihoods elsewhere. History becomes more honest when we follow both directions of the journey. Fact 37. Industrial cities grew faster than many systems could support. As factories attracted workers, towns and cities expanded rapidly. New streets appeared. Rows of houses rose near mills and workshops. Markets, chapels, schools, public houses, and shops followed the growing population. But expansion was often faster than planning. Water supplies, drainage, waste removal, and housing did not always keep pace. In some areas, families lived in cramped rooms with little ventilation and few services. Industrial cities could be places of energy and opportunity, but also places where daily life was physically difficult. The city was becoming a new kind of environment. It was built by human effort, but it could feel as powerful as weather. Smoke hung over rooftops. Bells marked shifts. Carts rumbled through streets. The industrial city had its own climate, rhythm, and challenges. Fact 38. Workers' housing was often built close to mills and mines. Many industrial workers lived near the places where they worked. This made sense in a world before cheap, reliable commuting. A short walk to a mill or mine could be necessary when the workday began early and ended late. Some housing was sturdy and reasonably planned, and much of it was crowded, poorly ventilated, or lacking proper sanitation. Streets of terraced houses could be built quickly to meet demand. Behind the neat front doors, living conditions varied greatly. Home and work were closely connected. A factory whistle could be heard from a bedroom. Coal smoke might settle on windowsills. Children might grow up knowing the route to the mill, long before they understood the larger economy that had built their neighborhood. Fact 39. Crowded housing helped spread disease in industrial towns. When many people lived close together without clean water or effective sewage systems, disease could spread quickly. In the 19th century, towns struggled with outbreaks of cholera, typhus, and other illnesses. At first, people did not always understand how disease moved. Some blamed bad air alone. Others gradually gathered evidence about water, waste, and living conditions. Reformers, doctors, engineers, and local officials began to argue that public health was not only a private matter. It required shared systems. The history of sanitation can sound unromantic, but it is deeply human. A clean water pipe, a sewer, or a refuse collection system can save lives quietly. Industrial cities taught hard lessons about what happens when growth outruns care for the people living inside it. Fact 40. Smoke became one of the most visible signs of industrial life. Coal smoke changed the appearance of industrial towns. Chimneys released soot and gases into the air. Buildings darkened. Laundry gathered grime. Fog could mix with smoke and make streets feel dim even during the day. For some people, smoke became a symbol of progress. It suggested engines running, wages being earned, and goods being made. For others, it was an unwanted companion that affected breathing, health, and the beauty of the landscape. This difference in feeling is important. Industrialization could look impressive from a distance and exhausting from nearby. A skyline full of chimneys might mean prosperity to an investor and discomfort to a family living below it. The same smoke could carry many meanings. Fact 41. Gaslight extended the useful hours of the day. Gaslighting changed streets, shops, theaters, factories, and homes. Before widespread electric light, gas lamps offered a way to make evenings brighter and more usable. Urban life could continue after sunset with a new sense of possibility. A gaslit street was not as bright as a modern one. Pools of light stood between stretches of shadow, but even that limited illumination changed how people moved and worked. Shop windows could glow. Factories could continue later. Public spaces could feel more active at night. Light is a form of power. Industrialization brought new ways to produce it, distribute it, and sell it. The night did not disappear, but it became less absolute. In the warm circle of a gas lamp, the industrial city began to discover a longer day. Fact 42. Factory noise created a new soundscape. The sounds of factory work could be intense. Looms clattered, belts whirred, steam hissed, hammers struck metal. In a large mill, conversation could be difficult. Workers learned to communicate through gestures, timing, and familiarity with the machinery. Noise was not only a discomfort, it was also information. A skilled worker might notice when a machine sounded wrong. A change in rhythm could signal a broken thread, a loose belt, or a problem in the engine room. For people used to rural quiet or small workshops, industrial noise could feel overwhelming. The new soundscape marked a shift in daily life. The world was not merely producing more. It was producing more loudly. Fact 43. Long working hours became a major social concern. Early factory schedules could be long, especially for workers with little power to negotiate. A day might begin before sunrise and end after dark. The exact hours varied by industry, place, age, and period, but exhaustion was a common part of industrial life. Long hours affected everything else. They shaped family time, meals, sleep, education, health, and community life. A worker who spent most of the day in a mill had little energy left for anything beyond survival. Arguments over working time became central to reform movements. People asked whether economic growth should require such heavy demands. The debate was not abstract. It was about how many waking hours belonged to a person, a family, or an employer. Fact 44. Child labor was common in many early factories and mines. Children worked in many industrial settings, including mills, mines, workshops, and streets. Some families depended on their earnings. Employers valued children because they could be paid less and were thought able to perform certain tasks around machines or in narrow spaces. The reality could be harsh. Long hours, dangerous conditions, limited schooling, and fatigue shaped many young lives. Accounts from the period helped reformers argue that children needed greater protection. It is important not to treat child labor as a strange side note. It was part of the economic structure of early industrialization. Families, employers, lawmakers, and reformers all debated it. Changes in law did not happen because the problem was small. They happened because people recognized that childhood should not be consumed entirely by work. Fact 45. Early factory laws began to limit some forms of child labor. Britain's early factory legislation developed gradually. The Health and Morals of Apprentices Act of 1802 addressed conditions for certain apprentices. Later laws placed limits on child employment in cotton mills and other factories. These laws were often incomplete and difficult to enforce. A rule on paper did not always change a factory floor. Still, they mattered because they established an important principle. High dampened, the state could regulate industrial work in the name of health, safety, and education. The legal changes were part of a larger shift in public thinking. Work was no longer seen only as a private agreement between employer and worker. It was also becoming a question of social responsibility. The factory had entered public debate. Fact 46. The 1833 Factory Act created a small inspectorate. The Factory Act of 1833 was a significant step in British factory reform. It restricted the employment of very young children in textile factories, limited hours for younger workers, required some schooling, and created factory inspectors to help enforce the rules. Inspectors mattered because laws need eyes and ears. Without people able to visit workplaces, gather information and report abuses, regulations could remain distant promises. The inspectorate was small at first, but it represented a new relationship between government and industrial life. The act did not solve every problem. Reform came in stages, but it helped make the factory a place that could be examined by the public authority, not simply controlled behind closed doors by owners. Fact 47. Women were central to industrial labor, not merely observers of it. Women worked in textile mills, workshops, domestic service, mines in some periods and regions, markets, and many forms of home-based labor. Their wages could be essential to household survival. Yet their work was often undervalued, poorly paid, or described as secondary, even when it was not. Industrialization changed the balance between paid work inside and outside the home. For some women, factory employment offered wages and a wider social world. For others, it added long hours to existing responsibilities for children, food, cleaning, and care. The history of industrial labor is incomplete without women. They operated machines, organized households, joined protests, saved money, taught children, and navigated the demands of changing cities. The industrial world was built by more hands than the old paintings of engineers usually show. Fact 48. Skilled craftspeople remained important in the age of machines. Machines did not eliminate skill. In many cases, they created new kinds of skilled work. Mechanics repaired engines, Tool makers shaped metal. Pattern makers prepared forms for casting. Engineers designed systems. Printers, dyers, glassworkers, and many others continued to rely on experience that could not be learned in a day. A machine could repeat a task, but someone had to build it, adjust it, clean it, and understand when it was failing. Industrialization changed skill rather than simply replacing it. This is one reason the age was full of tension. Some old skills lost value. Other skills became more valuable. Workers had to adapt, sometimes willingly, and sometimes under pressure. The factory was not a place where human knowledge disappeared. It was a place where human knowledge took new forms. Fact 49. The Luddites protested changes they believed threatened their livelihoods. The Luddites are often remembered as people who simply hated machines. The reality was more complicated. In the early 19th century, textiles workers associated with the Luddite movement protested against the use of certain machinery and against practices that threatened wages and skilled work. They were not rejecting all technology in a simple way. Many understood machinery very well. Their anger was often directed at employers who used new methods to cut pay, bypass customary standards, or reduce the value of skilled labor. Their story reminds us that arguments about technology are often really arguments about power. A machine can be useful, but who owns it? Who benefits from it? Who bears the cost when work changes? These questions were alive then, and they remain familiar today. Fact 50. Trade unions grew as workers sought collective strength. Workers often had little power alone, especially in large industries. Trade unions offered a way to join together, share information, support one another, and bargain for better pay or conditions. Unions faced legal restrictions and public suspicion in different periods. Organizing could be risky. Employers might resist. Workers might lose wages during a strike. Yet the desire for collective action continued because industrial work brought people into shared conditions. A union meeting could be a quiet act of confidence. People who spent the day following a factory schedule gathered in the evening to discuss wages, safety, hours, and dignity. They learned that a problem felt by one worker might be felt by many. That recognition changed the political landscape. Fact 51. Chartism asked for wider political representation. Chartism was a major working-class political movement in 19th century Britain. Its supporters called for reforms including wider male suffrage and secret ballots and changes that would make Parliament more representative. The movement shows that industrial grievances were not only about pay. Workers also asked who had the right to make laws. If factories, mines, and cities were changing society, should political power remain limited to a narrow group? Chartist meetings, petitions, speeches, and newspapers gave many people a language for discussing democracy. Not all their demands were granted immediately, but the movement helped keep the question of representation alive. The Industrial Revolution changed the economy, and people increasingly argued that politics must change too. Fact 52. Friendly societies offered help before modern welfare systems. Before many modern forms of social insurance existed, workers often joined friendly societies. Members paid regular contributions into a shared fund. In times of illness, injury, unemployment, or death, the society could provide support. These organizations were practical and social. They offered a measure of security in an uncertain world. They also created communities of mutual responsibility. A worker who had little savings might still know that fellow members could help during a difficult time. Friendly societies remind us that industrial workers did not simply wait for reform from above. They built their own networks of support. In crowded towns where people could feel anonymous, shared funds and meetings created a sense of belonging. Fact 53. May. Industrial workers created new forms of leisure and community. Even in places with long working hours, people made time for community. Music halls, pubs, chapels, sports clubs, reading rooms, markets, parks, and family gatherings all became part of urban life. Leisure was not only escape, it was a way of building identity. A football match, choir practice, or local celebration could bring neighbors together after a demanding week. Newspapers and cheap print gave people new subjects to discuss. Excursions by train opened the possibility of travel for those who had rarely gone far from home. The industrial city could be harsh, but it was never only harsh. People filled it with friendship, humor, music, argument, faith, and ordinary pleasures. Life continued in the spaces between shifts. Fact 54. Religion and reform often met in industrial communities. Chapels, churches, missions, and religious groups played important roles in many industrial towns. They offered worship, education, charity, social gatherings, and sometimes support for reform. Religious belief could encourage people to see poverty and exploitation as moral questions rather than simply unavoidable facts. Some reformers drew strength from faith. Others used religious networks to organize schools, food relief, or campaigns for better conditions. The relationship was not always simple. Religious institutions could also promote discipline and acceptance. But in many places, they provided spaces where people could meet, learn, and speak. A chapel beside a mill might become part of the social fabric of an entire neighborhood. Fact 55. The Poor Law shaped how society responded to poverty. Industrialization brought new wealth, but it also made poverty more visible in growing towns. Britain revised its poor law system in the 19th century, creating rules that affected how relief was given to people in need. Workhouses became a feared symbol of this system. They were intended to provide aid while discouraging dependence, but their strict conditions and separation of families could make them deeply painful places. But the debate around poverty raised difficult questions. Was hardship caused by personal failure, by bad luck, by illness, by economic change, or by the structure of work itself? Industrial society did not agree on the answer. But the question became impossible to ignore when poverty stood beside wealth in the same crowded city. Fact 56. Schooling slowly became more central to childhood. As laws restricted child labor and reformers argued for education, schooling became more important. The change was gradual and uneven. Families still needed income, and schools required funding, teachers, buildings, and public support. Yet the idea of childhood began to shift. A child was increasingly seen as someone who should learn, develop, and be protected, not only someone who could contribute wages. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and discipline became part of preparing young people's society for a changing society. Education also served industry in its own way. Factories, offices, railways, and governments needed people who could read instructions, keep records, and use numbers. Schooling was both a social reform and a response to a more complex economic world. Fact 57. Cholera outbreaks forced cities to rethink water and waste. Cholera outbreaks in the 19th century were terrifying. The disease could spread rapidly through crowded communities, and people initially struggled to understand why. Over time, investigations helped reveal the importance of contaminated water and poor sanitation. The response involved engineers as much as doctors. Clean water supplies, drainage systems, sewers, and waste removal became major public concerns. These projects were expensive and often controversial, powerful, but they changed urban life profoundly. The lesson was simple and powerful. Health could depend on systems that everyone shared. A city could not remain healthy if only some neighborhoods had clean water. Industrial growth had made people live closer together, and public health required a new kind of collective care. Fact 58. Reformers used investigation and evidence to argue for change. 19th century reformers often gathered testimony, statistics, observations, and reports about working and living conditions. They visited factories, mines, homes, hospitals, and streets. They listened to workers and recorded what they saw. This use of evidence mattered. A description of hardship could move the heart, but repeated evidence could also influence law and policy. Reports made hidden conditions visible to people who might never enter a mine or a crowded cellar. Industrial society was learning to measure itself. It counted deaths, wages, hours, population, housing, and disease. Numbers could be cold, but they could also give weight to voices that had been ignored. A table of facts might become part of a campaign for a safer life. Fact 59. Industrial cities developed new forms of public service. As cities grew, local governments faced tasks that earlier towns had rarely managed on such a scale. They had to think about water, drainage, roads, street lighting, fire services, markets, schools, and public health. These services didn't appear all at once, and their quality differed widely. But the growing city required new forms of administration. Someone had to plan, collect taxes, inspect buildings, and maintain systems that served thousands of people. The industrial city, therefore, helped create a more organized public world. Behind the visible factories stood less visible networks of clerks, engineers, inspectors, and local officials. They were part of the machinery of urban life, though their tools were often pens, ledgers, maps, and meetings. Fact 60. Engineers became celebrated figures of the industrial age. Engineers gained new prominence as canals, bridges, railways, engines, tunnels, and factories spread. People such as Isambard Kingdom Brunel and many less famous engineers became symbols of practical imagination. But engineering was never only about grand designs. It involved surveying land, testing materials, calculating loads, managing workers, solving unexpected problems, and revising plans. A bridge or railway line might look simple when finished, but it represented countless decisions made along the way. The industrial age admired the engineer because engineering seemed to offer a way of shaping childhood through knowledge. Rivers could be crossed. Hills could be cut through. Machines could be improved. Yet every project also reminded people that nature could resist with weather, geology, water, and time. Fact 61. Surveying turned landscapes into measured plans. Before a canal or railway could be built, someone had to study the land. Surveyors measured distances, elevations, slopes, and boundaries. They turned hills, fields, rivers, and villages into maps and numbers. This work could seem quiet compared with blasting a tunnel or launching a train. Yet, it was essential. A small error in a survey could become a costly problem when thousands of tons of earth and iron were involved. Surveying changed how people saw the landscape. A valley was not only a beautiful place, it was also a route to be graded, bridged, or avoided. A hill was not only a landmark, it was an obstacle with a measurable height. Industrialization brought a new habit of looking at land through plans, lines, and possibilities. Fact 62. Patent systems encouraged people to protect and promote inventions. Inventions were valuable, and inventors often wanted legal protection for their ideas. Patent systems offered a way to claim rights over certain designs or processes for a limited time. This could encourage investment by promising that successful inventions might bring financial reward. Patents did not guarantee success. Many inventions never became widely used. Others depended on manufacturers, investors, and workers who could turn an idea into a practical system. Still, patents became part of the culture of industrial innovation. The inventor's workshop became a familiar image. Sketches, models, tools, and experiments. Behind that image, however, stood a larger network. An invention needed materials, money, skilled labor, and a market. The Industrial Revolution rewarded creativity, but it also rewarded connection. Fact 63. Scientific ideas and industrial practice began to influence one another more closely. The relationship between science and industry was not always direct, but it grew stronger over time. Practical problems in mining, metallurgy, chemistry, transport, and manufacturing encouraged experiments and new forms of knowledge. At the same time, scientific discoveries could suggest new materials, processes, and products. Chemists studied dyes and gases. Engineers studied heat and motion. Geologists examined coal fields and rock layers. The boundaries between workshop knowledge and formal science became more active. This exchange was often slow. A discovery in a laboratory might take years to become useful in industry. A practical problem in a factory might lead to a new scientific question. The Industrial Revolution was not only about building machines, it was also about learning to ask different questions of the material world. Fact 64. The telegraph made communication faster than travel. The electric telegraph changed communication by allowing messages to travel along wires far faster than a horse, ship, or train. By the mid-19th century, telegraph networks were linking cities, railways, businesses, and eventually continents. For railways, fast communication improved coordination and safety. For merchants, it allowed quicker information about prices and shipments. For newspapers, it changed how rapidly news could be shared. The telegraph made distance feel different. A message could cross a region in minutes, even when a person needed hours or days to travel there. This separation of communication from physical movement was one of the deepest changes of the industrial age. The world began to feel more connected, even before the telephone and radio arrived. Fact 65. Printing became cheaper and more widely available. Industrial methods helped make paper, printing, and distribution more efficient. Newspapers, books, pamphlets, posters, and advertisements became more widely available to many readers. Cheap print changed public life. Workers could read about politics, strikes, inventions, crime, sports, and events beyond their neighborhood. Reformers could circulate arguments. Businesses could advertise products. Families could buy stories and advice. The printed page became another kind of machine-made object carrying ideas through the industrial world. A newspaper folded in a worker's pocket might connect a local street to a national debate. Literacy and print did not solve inequality, but they gave more people access to information and imagination. Fact 66. The postal system became a routine part of modern connection. As transport improved and postal systems expanded, letters could move more regularly and cheaply. Families separated by migration or work could remain in contact. Businesses could send orders and invoices. Friends could share news across distance. A letter is a quiet object, but in the 19th century, it became part of a faster world. Railways carried mail. Post offices became familiar institutions. The arrival of the post could mark a small daily event in a household. Industrialization did not only create large machines, it also created more dependable routines of connection. The letter, the timetable, the receipt, and the printed notice all helped people coordinate lives that were becoming more mobile and complex. Fact 67. Factory-made goods changed the choices available to ordinary consumers. As production increased, many goods became more available or more affordable. Cloth, household items, tools, ceramics, metal goods, printed materials, and later, a wide range of consumer products could reach more people, is more than before. This did not mean everyone could buy everything. Poverty remained real, and wages varied. But the range of goods in shops and markets began to grow. Advertising encouraged people to imagine new needs and new comforts. The industrial economy changed the relationship between people and objects. A household could own more manufactured items, each made by people it would never meet. The distance between maker and buyer increased, while the number of goods in daily life also increased. Fact 68. Clothing became more connected to industrial production and global trade. Textile factories helped produce cloth at large scales, making clothing more deeply tied to industrial systems. Fashion, class, work, and identity were all affected by what people could afford to wear. Machine-made fabric did not erase hand sewing. Many garments were still cut, stitched, altered, and repaired by hand. But the availability of cloth changed. A dress, shirt, apron, uniform, or coat could begin with raw fiber from one region, pass through factories in another, and be sold far away. Clothing is personal, yet industrializations made it global. The fabric against a person's skin could carry the history of fields, ships, mills, markets, and labor. The ordinary act of getting dressed became connected to a world much larger than the room where it happened. Fact 69. Food systems changed as cities and transport networks expanded. Growing industrial cities needed reliable food supplies. Farmers, merchants, railways, canals, markets, and shopkeepers all became part of the effort to feed large urban populations. Transport made it easier to move food from rural areas to cities. New methods of processing, preserving, packaging, and selling food also developed. Yet access remained unequal. A city could be full of goods while poor families still struggled to afford enough nutritious food. The Industrial Revolution changed not only where people worked, but also how they ate. Time, wages, distance, and markets shaped meals. A factory worker's dinner was connected to shifts, prices, and the availability of fuel for cooking. Even the simplest meal could reflect the larger economy. Fact 70. Domestic life adapted to industrial schedules. When work became organized by shifts and clocks, home life often adapted around it. Meals were planned around departures and returns. Children might be cared for by relatives or older siblings. Laundry, shopping, cooking, and rest all had to fit around the demands of paid labor. This could create strain, but families also found routines. A shared evening meal, a Sunday walk, or a few quiet minutes by the fire could become precious. Industrialization changed the schedule of the household, not only the schedule of the factory. The home remained a place of work in many ways. Cleaning, mending, cooking, childcare, and care for the sick were essential labor, even when unpaid. The industrial age was built as much by these hidden routines as by engines and mills. Fact 71. Writers and artists recorded the drama and hardship of industrial life. Novelists, journalists, painters, poets, and social observers responded to industrial change. Some described crowded streets, child workers, smoky skies, and the feeling of a city growing too quickly. Others were fascinated by bridges, engines, railways, and new forms of wealth. Literature helped people imagine lives beyond their own neighborhood. A reader in a comfortable home could encounter the story of a factory child. A worker could see familiar streets described in print. Art and writing turned industrial life into a subject of reflection. These records matter because statistics alone cannot capture feeling. A report can tell us how many houses stood in a street. A novel can help us imagine the sound of footsteps in that street at dawn. Together, evidence and art help the past feel more human. Fact 72. Industrial wealth was distributed very unevenly. Factories, mines, railways, and trade created fortunes for some owners, merchants, and investors. At the same time, many workers lived with low wages, insecurity, and little protection against illness or unemployment. This contrast could be visible within a single city. Grand houses, offices, warehouses, and public buildings stood not far from crowded worker districts. The wealth of industry was real, but so was the question of who received it. Industrialization made inequality harder to ignore because production became so visible. A great mill could suggest prosperity, yet the people inside it might have little control over their lives. This tension helped fuel reform, political debate, union activity, and new ideas about social responsibility. Fact 73. Banks and credit helped finance industrial expansion. Large industrial projects needed money long before they produced profit. A canal, railway, factory, or mine required land, machinery, labor, and materials. Banks, investors, partnerships, and credit networks helped gather the necessary funds. Finance can feel distant from the physical world of engines and workshops, but it was essential. A machine could not be installed without payment. A railway could not be laid without capital. A merchant needed credit to buy goods before selling them. The Industrial Revolution therefore changed the world of numbers, as well as the world of metal. Ledgers, shares, loans, insurance policies, and contracts became part of the hidden structure behind visible industrial growth. Fact 74. Railway investment attracted excitement and speculation. Railways promised profit, speed, and national connection. As new lines were proposed, investors sometimes rushed to buy shares. This enthusiasm could become speculation, with people hoping to benefit from projects that had not yet proved successful. Some railway ventures transformed regions. Others struggled or failed. The excitement showed how strongly people believed that transport could reshape the future. A line of rails across a map could seem like a promise of wealth. Speculation also reveals a more anxious side of industrial capitalism. The future was valuable, but uncertain. People invested not only in what existed, but in what they hoped might exist. The industrial age learned to dream in spreadsheets and maps, as well as in smoke and steel. Fact 75. Insurance became more important in an industrial and commercial world. Factories, ships, warehouses, railways and machines all carried risk. Fire, accident, storm, theft, and failure could destroy valuable property. Insurance offered a way to spread some of that risk across many people. As industrial society grew more complex, insurance became part of its quiet infrastructure. It did not prevent disaster, but it helped businesses and families recover from certain kinds of loss. Insurance records also reveal what people feared: fire in a mill, sinking ships, damaged cargo, injured workers, and more. The modern economy depends on many arrangements that are rarely visible. Insurance is one of them. It sits in the background, turning uncertainty into a calculation. The Industrial Revolution expanded not only machines, but also the systems built to manage their dangers. Fact 76. Industrial expansion depended on resources from many parts of the world. Coal and iron were crucial, but industrial economies also needed cotton, timber, rubber, dyes, metals, food, and many other materials. These resources came from different climates and regions, often through trade systems shaped by unequal power. A factory could stand in one town while relying on forests, fields, mines, and plantations thousands of miles away. This made industrialization global, even when its most visible buildings were local. The wider system brought connection, but not always fairness. Decisions made in distant offices could affect workers and communities far away. Following the path of a raw material helps reveal the real scale of industrial history. It was a story of rivers and railways, but also oceans and empires. Fact 77. Industrial power was often linked to colonial control. Industrialized states could use their wealth, technology, and military power to expand influence abroad. Factories produced weapons, ships, uniforms, and supplies. Railways and telegraphs could help governments control territory and move armies. Colonial rule was never simply a side effect of industrialization, but the two were often connected. Industrial power could strengthen empires, while colonies supplied raw materials, labor, markets, and strategic positions. This connection is difficult but necessary to include. The Industrial Revolution brought new capacity, and capacity can be used in many ways. It can build bridges, schools, and hospitals. It can also support domination and extraction. History asks us to see both possibilities. Fact 78. Wars were shaped by industrial production. As industry expanded, war increasingly depended on factories, transport, and supply systems. Armies needed uniforms, weapons, food, ammunition, rail movement, and communication. The ability to produce and move large quantities of material became a source of power. This did not make war inevitable, but it changed its scale and organization. A nation with strong industrial capacity could equip forces more quickly. Railways could move troops and supplies over long distances. Telegraphs could carry orders faster than couriers. Industrialization made power more material. It could be measured in tons of coal, miles of track, units of production, and the capacity of workshops. The same systems that carried passengers and goods could also serve military purposes. Fact 79. The later 19th century brought a second wave of industrial change. Historians often speak of a second industrial revolution in the later 19th century. This period saw major advances in steel, chemicals, electricity, petroleum, and new forms of large-scale production. The earlier industrial world had been shaped by coal, steam, iron, and textiles. The later one added new materials and energies. Factories became larger. Companies became more complex. Cities grew further. Communication and transport continued to accelerate. The transition was not a clean break. Older industries remained important. Steam did not vanish when electricity appeared, but the new wave expanded what industry could do. The modern world began to take on even more familiar forms. Fact 80. Steel became a key material for a changing world. Steel is stronger and more flexible than many forms of iron. Improved steelmaking processes in the 19th century made it possible to produce larger quantities at lower cost. This opened new possibilities for railways, ships, bridges, buildings, and machinery. Steel changed the scale of construction. Longer bridges could span rivers. Taller buildings could rise in cities. Rails could carry heavier loads. Ships could become larger and more durable. Like iron before it, steel was not merely a material. It was a permission slip for new ideas. Engineers could imagine structures that earlier materials made difficult or impossible. The skyline and the transport network both began to change shape. Fact 81. Electricity transformed light, communication, and power. Electricity gradually entered daily life through telegraphs, lighting, motors, and later, many household and industrial uses. Unlike steam power, electricity could be transmitted over distance through wires. This made it possible to separate the place where power was generated from the place where it was used. Electric light changed shops, streets, homes, and factories. It offered a brighter and cleaner form of illumination than gas in many settings. Electric motors allowed machinery to be arranged in new ways. The arrival of electricity did not erase the old industrial world. Coal often remained the fuel used to generate it, but electricity made energy feel more invisible and more flexible. A switch could bring light without a flame. That simple act changed the mood of modern life. Fact 82. The chemical industry created new dyes, medicines, and materials. Industrial chemistry developed rapidly in the 19th century. New processes created synthetic dyes, fertilizers, acids, soaps, explosives, medicines, and many other products. Factories began to transform matter at a molecular level as well as a mechanical one. Synthetic dyes were especially noticeable because they changed the colors available in cloth and consumer goods. Bright shades that had once been rare or expensive could become more accessible. Chemistry entered. Fashion, agriculture, health, and industry. This was another step in the widening reach of industrial knowledge. The factory was no longer only a place of spinning, forging, or assembling. It could also be a place where substances were studied, mixed, heated, and transformed into something entirely new. Fact 83. Mass production changed how goods were made and sold. Mass production means making large numbers of similar items through organized processes. It depends on standard parts, reliable machines, divided tasks, and large markets. These ideas developed over time and became especially important in the later industrial age. The advantage was scale. When a product could be made repeatedly, its cost might fall. More people could buy it. But mass production also changed work. A person might perform one small task again and again rather than making an entire object from start to finish. This trade-off remains familiar. Standardization can make goods available, but it can also make work repetitive. The Industrial Revolution asked people to consider what is gained and what is lost when production becomes more efficient. Fact 84. The United States became a major industrial power in the late 19th century. After the American Civil War, industry in the United States expanded rapidly. Railroads, steel, oil, electricity, manufacturing, and large corporations transformed the economy. Cities grew as people moved from rural areas and arrived from abroad. This growth created jobs and wealth, but also dangerous workplaces, crowded neighborhoods, labor conflict, and intense inequality. The scale of American industry became enormous, supported by natural resources, capital, immigration, and a large national market. The United States showed how industrialization could accelerate when transport, finance, and production were linked across a continent. But its story also carried the unresolved burdens of racial inequality, indigenous dispossession, and unequal access to opportunity. Fact 85. Large factories required new kinds of management. As workplaces became larger, owners and managers needed ways to coordinate hundreds or thousands of workers. Timekeeping, supervisors, records, rules, inventories, and standardized procedures became more important. Management could make production more organized, but it could also make work feel less personal. A worker might be known by a number, a shift, or a task rather than by a craft. The relationship between employer and employee became more distant in many large organizations. This was a subtle change in social life. 1. Industrialization did not only alter machines, it altered authority. Decisions could be made in an office far from the workshop floor. Workers increasingly had to navigate systems rather than only individuals. Fact 86. Labor protest became part of industrial democracy. Strikes, petitions, marches, unions, and public meetings became ways for workers to make demands. Industrial life brought many people together in similar conditions, and that made collective action possible. Protest could be peaceful or confrontational. It could win reforms or face harsh repression. Workers risked lost wages and punishment when they organized. Yet, the willingness to act together changed what employers and governments had to consider. Industrial democracy was not handed down easily. It was argued for, organized, and contested. The right to speak, vote, organize, and bargain became linked to the daily realities of work. A factory gate could become the starting point for a political movement. Fact 87. Industrialization changed the environment on a large scale. Coal smoke, mining waste, altered rivers, cleared land, and expanding cities changed landscapes. Industrial growth made some areas wealthier, but it also placed heavy demands on air, water, forests, and soil. At the time, many people accepted pollution as the price of progress. Others complained, organized, and sought cleaner conditions. The debate over industry and environment did not begin in the modern era. It began as soon as people noticed that smoke, waste, and extraction were reshaping the places where they lived. Yes. The industrial age taught a difficult lesson. Human power over nature can create comfort and wealth, but it can also create consequences that spread far beyond the factory wall. Fact 88. Industrial pollution encouraged early environmental concern, smoke nuisance, contaminated rivers, and damaged landscapes led some people to call for regulation and protection. Their concerns did not always use modern environmental language, but they recognized that industrial activity affected shared spaces. A river used by factories might also be used for drinking water. Air, filled with smoke, did not remain inside a mill. Waste from one business could affect an entire neighborhood. These realities encouraged the idea that private industry had public consequences. Early environmental concern was often local and practical. People wanted cleaner water, less smokes, streets, and healthier homes. Yet, these requests helped establish a larger principle. Progress should be judged not only by what it produces, but also by what it leaves behind. Fact 89. Industrial heritage survives in mills, mines, canals, and railways. Many industrial sites still exist as museums, heritage buildings, ruins, parks, and working structures. Old mills have become apartments, galleries, archives, and cultural spaces. Canals once used for coal now carry walkers and boats. Railway stations and bridges remain part of everyday travel. These places preserve more than bricks and machinery. They hold the memory of work, skill, migration, conflict, and change. A worn stair in a mill can suggest thousands of feet climbing to a shift. A canal lock can recall the slow movement of coal and goods. Industrial heritage helps us remember that the modern world was built in particular places by particular people. The past is not entirely gone. Sometimes it stands quietly beside a new cafe, office, or railway platform. Fact 90. The Industrial Revolution changed ordinary habits that still feel normal today. Many routines now seem ordinary. Working by a clock, commuting, buying factory-made goods, receiving mail quickly, reading newspapers, using public utilities, or traveling according to a timetable. Yet these habits were shaped by industrial change. The Industrial Revolution did not invent every part of modern life, but it strengthened the systems that made many routines widespread. It taught people to think in schedules, networks, production, efficiency, and growth. This is why the period still feels close. We may not live beside a steam mill, but we still live in a world shaped by factories, transport systems, global trade, and the relationship between work and time. The past continues quietly in the patterns of the present. Fact 91. There was never just one cause of industrialization. It is tempting to search for it a single answer. Coal, steam, cotton, empire, science, capitalism, population, or invention. Each matters. None explains everything alone. Industrialization grew through combinations. A useful machine needed energy. Energy needed fuel. Fuel needed transport. Transport needed investment. Investment needed confidence. Confidence often depended on markets, laws, and political power. Workers and communities made the system function even when they did not benefit equally from it. The Industrial Revolution is best understood as a woven fabric. Pull one thread and many others move. Its complexity is not a problem to solve. It is part of what makes the story so enduring. Fact 92. The Industrial Revolution was made by millions of ordinary people. Famous inventors and industrialists are easy to name, but the Industrial Revolution was carried forward by countless people, whose names were never recorded in books. They dug coal, spun thread, built walls, repaired engines, kept accounts, cooked meals, raised children, drove carts, loaded ships, and taught skills to the next generation. Their work made large systems possible. A railway needed not only an engineer, but also laborers, surveyors, suppliers, clerks, station staff, and passengers. A factory needed not only an owner, but a whole community of hands and minds. When we remember the Industrial Revolution, it is worth remembering this quiet truth. History is not only made in boardrooms and workshops of famous inventors. It is made in the daily effort of ordinary people. Fact 93. Industrial accidents revealed the human cost of rapid production. Factories, mines, railways, docks, and construction sites could be dangerous. Moving belts, exposed gears, heavy loads, boilers, shafts, and crowded workspaces created risks that were not always well understood or well regulated. Accidents were often treated as private misfortunes at first, but as reports accumulated, workers and reformers argued that safety was not simply a matter of individual care. Machines and workplaces could be designed, inspected, and managed in safer ways. The gradual growth of safety rules was one more sign that industrial society was learning from its own dangers. A guard around a gear, a safer lamp in a mine, or a rule about boiler inspection may sound small, yet such measures could change the course of an ordinary life. Fact 94. Migration supplied labor and changed the character of industrial cities. Industrial towns drew people from nearby villages, other regions, and other countries. Families moved in search of wages, safety, opportunity, or a new beginning. Their languages, foods, skills, customs, and beliefs became part of city life. Migration could bring hope, but it could also bring hardship. New arrivals often faced crowded housing, unfamiliar work, prejudice, and insecure employment. Still, they helped build the streets, factories, railways, and neighborhoods of the industrial world. A city is never only made of bricks. It is made of journeys. Industrial cities were filled with people carrying memories of other places, trying to create a life within the noise and possibility of a changing age. Fact 95. Department stores and catalogues made shopping feel like an experience. As manufacturing and transport expanded, retail changed too. Large stores in growing cities displayed many kinds of goods under one roof. Catalogues allowed customers to imagine and order products from a distance. Shopping became more than a trip for necessities. Window displays, advertisements, labels, and fixed prices encouraged people to browse, compare, and desire. The consumer became an important figure in industrial society alongside the worker and the owner. This development had a dreamy quality. A printed catalogue could carry images of objects into a rural home. A shop window could turn a city street into a small theatre of light and colour. Industrial production began to shape not only what people needed, but also what they imagined owning. Fact 96. Photography gave the industrial age a new way to remember itself. Photography developed during the 19th century and gradually offered a new way to record people, places, machines, and events. Factories, bridges, streets, workers, and families could be captured with a kind of detail that drawings did not always provide. Early photographs required patience. Subjects might need to remain still. Equipment was heavy, yet the results could feel startlingly immediate. A worker staring at the camera, a train at a station, or a skyline of chimneys could preserve a moment that might otherwise fade. Photography changed memory. It allowed industrial society to see itself more directly, sometimes proudly, and sometimes uncomfortably. The past began to leave behind not only written descriptions, but faces and places held in light. Fact 97. World fairs displayed industry as a spectacle of progress. 19th century international exhibitions and world fairs displayed machines, products, art, raw materials, and engineering from many regions. They invited visitors to walk through halls filled with glass, iron, engines, textiles, and inventions. These events celebrated industry as a sign of national achievement and human progress. But they also reflected competition between empires and unequal relationships between colonizing powers and colonized peoples. Sporhive. The objects on display carried complicated histories. Still, the fairs captured a feeling of the age. People gathered to look at what machines could do. A new engine or building method could seem almost magical. Industry was not only something people worked inside. It became something they came to see and wonder about. Fact 98. Public transport reshaped the daily geography of cities. Railways connected cities, but trams, omnibuses, and later underground systems changed movement within them. Workers could live farther from their workplaces. Markets, parks, docks, and neighborhoods became more reachable. This altered the shape of the city. A person's daily world was no longer limited to the distance they could comfortably walk. Commutes became part of life. Suburbs could grow. City centers could become more crowded during the day and quieter at night. Public transport was another example of industrial systems becoming ordinary. A scheduled ride might feel routine, but it depended on tracks, vehicles, fuel or electricity, maintenance, workers, and planning. Movement through the city became a shared, organized experience. Fact 99. The word progress became both an ideal and a question. Industrialization encouraged many people to believe in progress. The idea that new knowledge and technology could steadily improve human life. Engines, railways, medicine, sanitation, and communication seemed to offer strong evidence for that hope. But progress also became a question. Improved production did not automatically mean fair wages. A brighter city did not always mean a healthier one. A faster machine could bring both cheaper goods and harder work. This tension gives the Industrial Revolution much of its lasting power. It teaches that progress is not only about what becomes possible. It is also about who gains, who loses, and how societies choose to use the powers they create. Fact 100. The deepest legacy of the Industrial Revolution is still unfolding. The Industrial Revolution changed how humans use energy, organize work, build cities, travel, communicate, and trade. Its achievements and its harms continue to shape debates about technology, inequality, labor, health, and the environment. We still ask questions that would have sounded familiar in a 19th century mill town. Who benefits from a new machine? Who is protected when work changes? How should a city grow? What do we owe workers, children, neighbors, and the natural world? There may never be a final answer, but the history of industrialization gives us a long view. It shows that change can be creative and difficult at the same time. It asks us to look carefully at the systems around us and to remember that every great transformation is lived by real people in ordinary days. And now, as our journey through the Industrial Revolution comes gently to an end, you may imagine the old industrial landscape settling into quiet. The mill wheels have slowed. The canal lies dark and still beneath a narrow moon. Far away, a railway signal glows beside empty tracks. A few late windows remain lit, and then, one by one, their lights fade. The Industrial Revolution was full of motion. It changed the speed of work, travel, messages, and dreams. But tonight, there is nowhere to go quickly. There is nothing to manufacture, no timetable to catch, no bell to answer. You can leave the engines in the distance. Let the facts dissolve into the soft background of your thoughts, the thread on the loom, the patient beam of an early steam engine, the quiet measuring of a surveyor, the long curve of a canal, the warm glow of a gas lamp. History is made from movement, but rest is made from letting movement go. Thank you for spending this time with history to fall asleep. May your night be calm, your breathing be slow, and your dreams be gentle. Good night. As you rest, you do not need to hold on to the dates or the names. You can let them drift away. Keep only the feeling of the journey. A world of brick and mortar, metal and thread, darkness and lamplight, struggle and invention. Perhaps you can picture a canal boat slipping beneath a bridge, a station clock quietly marking the hour, or a distant engine sending a small ribbon of steam into the night. Those old scenes are far away, yet their echoes remain in the world around us. Now, let every wheel become still. Let every whistle grow faint. Let the long workday of history finally give way to rest.